Long before far left-wing communist groups like Black Lives Matter and Antifa rose to the occasion, torching, looting, assaulting, and even killing, the militant organization known as Weather Underground was actively trying to destroy the U.S. government from within decades earlier. The group's expressive political goal was to create a revolutionary party to overthrow the United States government. The 1960s was ripe with racial struggles, opposition to the Vietnam War, and a rise in the communist movements that had just been below the surface for decades. Here is the story of one of the most famous groups. What was the Weather Underground? Who was involved? What did they do? Were they ever held accountable? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. Weather Underground, originally known as Weathermen, was a far left-wing pro-communist militant group formed in 1969 that grew out of the anti-Vietnam War movement. Their genesis originated in the Students for a Democratic Society that represented the rise of left-wing socialism in the late 1960s. Members of the Weather Underground sought to advance communism through violent revolution, anarchy, and the group called upon America's youth to create a rearguard action against the U.S. government that would bring about its downfall. The best-known members of the Weather Underground included Jeffrey David Powell, Mark Rudd, James Mellon, and of course the married couple Bernardine Dohrn and Bill Ayers, and many others. The original Weathermen was led by Dohrn, Mellon, and Rudd, and they openly advocated street fighting as a method for weakening U.S. imperialism. At their SDS National Convention in June 1969, the newly created Third World Marxists presented a position paper. It was titled, "You Don't Need a Weatherman to Know Which Way the Wind Blows," published in the SDS newspaper, New Left Notes. The title of the article was taken from a song lyric by American musician Bob Dylan. Their positions included black liberation being key to the movement's anti-imperialist struggle, and it emphasized the need for a white revolutionary movement to support liberation movements internationally. The article became the mantra of the Weathermen. During the summer of 1969, the Weathermen launched an offensive, such as in the Northeast, where they tried to recruit new members at community colleges and high schools by marching into classrooms, tying up and gagging teachers, and presenting revolutionary speeches. Their violence extended to universities, such as at the Harvard Institute for International Affairs, where the group smashed windows, tore out phones, and beat professors. Their nationwide protests were planned to begin on the second anniversary of the death of revolutionary terrorist Che Guevara, and also coincide with the trial of the Chicago 8. These were 8 men charged with conspiracy for their actions of inciting riots during the Democratic National Convention in Chicago 1 year earlier. Their trial began on September 24, 1969, as the Chicago 8 were the first people tried under the first federal anti-riot law. On October 6, 1969, the Weathermen blew up a statue in Chicago's Haymarket Square commemorating the policeman who died in an 1886 riot. Then from October 8th to 11th, 1969, the Weathermen organized thousands of young people promoting a direct assault on the police nationwide, whom they called pigs, calling it a national action, but the major newspapers called it Days of Rage. The Weathermen's signs and slogans actively promoted open violence, with "Bring the War Home" and "The Time Has Come for Fighting in the Streets" being their platform. But these attempts at recruiting during demonstrations were less than successful. Their demonstrations had a low turnout, with less than 100 people attending, but the Weathermen incited several incidents of random violence and rioting, By the end of the week, 244 people, including local youth and SDS members, had been arrested, and total bail amounted to more than $1.5 million. Seeing that their national call for supporters, anti-war demonstrations, and violent anti-government uprisings had essentially failed through November 1969, the Weathermen called a national meeting to discuss their tactics, and meeting in Flint, Michigan, in December 1969. During that conference, the group decided to go underground and become a small-scale paramilitary operation carrying out urban guerrilla warfare. In 1970, the Weathermen had split into several underground cells throughout the country, mainly located in Berkeley, California, Chicago, Illinois, Detroit, Michigan, and New York City, with 3 to 5 people living together in a house in one cell. All these individual cells were directly connected to their leadership, which was called the Weather Bureau, operating the active members who were the above-ground support. The U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation had started their investigation into the group in June 1969 and estimated the Weathermen's total strength to be about 400 members. The FBI pursued these terrorists as their attacks mounted. Many members were identified, but their small numbers and guerrilla tactics helped them hide under assumed identities. The main leaders of the Weathermen went to Cuba in July 1969, violating U.S. travel restrictions, and met with North Vietnamese representatives to gain from their revolutionary experience. The North Vietnamese requested armed political action in order to stop the U.S. government's war in Vietnam. Fidel Castro gave them funding, training, recommendations on tactics, and possibly explosives, and training in how to use them. It would appear that the Weathermen should have had more training on explosives, because on March 6, 1970, 3 people in the group, Diana Alton, Ted Gold, and Terry Robbins, were killed in an explosion while they were making bombs in a rented townhouse Greenwich Village in downtown New York City. 2 who were not killed in the blast were Kathy Bowden and Kathy Wilkerson. The investigation into the blast allowed the authorities to recover 57 sticks of dynamite, 30 blasting caps, and timing devices in the rubble. The federal government issued indictments in April against 12 Weathermen members, and the entire group was charged with several conspiracy counts, public rioting, as well as unlawful possession of explosives. The Weathermen began bombing targets spanning the country in 1970, using tactics from the Handbook, Firearms and Self-Defense, a handbook for radicals, revolutionaries, and easy riders, and from the Brazilian Marxist writer and terrorist Carlos Marighela's mini manual of the urban guerrilla. Very important high-profile targets included New York City Police Department headquarters, the Presidio Army Base in San Francisco, a Long Island City courthouse, and several banks in Boston and New York. In fairness, the Weathermen gave warnings to prevent unwanted casualties, and followed by a communique dubbed the Weather Report, and Ayers himself was involved. The Weathermen used these reports to justify their attacks, citing recent police and government actions and the killing of 4 students by the Ohio National Guard at Kent State University, as well as what they called the unlawful incarceration of other revolutionaries. Several Weathermen were placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list, which had been expanded to 16 just to accommodate them, even as the bombings continued into 1971. They placed 2 bombs at the Capitol in Washington, D.C., which exploded on March 1st. There were no injuries, but it did cause $300,000 in damage. Following the death of fellow terrorist George Jackson in the San Quentin prison yard, which they believed was a sanctioned hit, the Weathermen attacked 3 offices of the California prison system. Then, just 2 weeks later, after the killing of 30 inmates in the uprising at New York's Attica Penitentiary, the Weathermen bombed the office of the State Commissioner of Corrections in Albany. The Pentagon bombing on May 19, 1972 involved Bill Ayers, and it was on the birthday of Ho Chi Minh, the leader of the Vietnamese nationalist movement, and it was the last major action for 18 months. After the peace treaty was signed between the United States and Vietnam in January 1973, the Weathermen were in an identity crisis as to their anti-war movement, since that was null and void. The group struggled to find a cause and lost legitimacy in the struggle for armed resistance, which was joined only by the Black Liberation Army, an offshoot of the New York Black Panthers, the George Jackson Brigade, and the Symbionese Liberation Army. But FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, and please see our video on him, who had been investigating anti-American and pro-communist groups for decades, had been running an illegal investigation operation called COINTELPRO, or Counterintelligence Program. Hoover's successor, FBI Director L. Patrick Gray, continued the operation. The Weathermen, later changing their name to Weather Underground, already indicted with warrants issued, with several members in custody, got the luckiest break of all. The U.S. Supreme Court had ruled, following a congressional investigation, that using electronic surveillance without a court order or warrant violated the Constitution. As a result, the government requested dropping the charge against most of the WUO members in 1973 because the Supreme Court decision would prevent any feasible prosecution. But there was another reason for dropping most of the charges. The government did not want to reveal the foreign intelligence secrets collected and their gathering methods, which would have been revealed at trial. Bernardine Dohrn was removed from the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list on December 7, 1973, due to the earlier federal grand juries held that subpoenaed Leslie Bacon and Stu Albert in the U.S. Capitol bombing case. The court ruled that these investigations were fishing expeditions, and there were no warrants issued. And the evidence was illegally gathered through black bag jobs, including illegal mail openings that involved the FBI and United States Postal Service, burglaries by FBI field offices, and electronic surveillance by the Central Intelligence Agency against the support network, friends, and family members of the Weather Underground as part of Nixon's sanctioned COINTELPRO apparatus. These convened grand juries caused Sylvia Jane Brown, Robert Gelbard, and future members of the Seattle Weather Collective to be subpoenaed in Seattle and Portland for the investigation of one of the first and last captured members, and those cases were dismissed. These decisions and exposure led to the resignation of Director L. Patrick Gray and included federal indictments against W. Mark Felt, better known as Deep Throat, and Edwin Miller, as both men had ordered FBI agents to break into homes secretly on 9 occasions from 1972 and 1973 without search warrants. They had changed their name to the Weather Underground in the spring of 1974, and they were still on the FBI radar since they were one of the last radical groups of the anti-war movement that still endorsed all forms of violence. But the Weather Underground continued their sporadic political bombings when they bombed the headquarters of the U.S. State Department in Washington, D.C. on January 29, 1975, causing no injuries. The blast damaged 20 offices on 3 floors, and just a few hours later, another bomb was found at a military induction center in Oakland, California, and safely detonated. The Weather Underground had claimed credit for the 25 bombings, but their days were numbered. In 1976, the West Coast faction split off to form the Weather Underground organization, which was infiltrated by the FBI in 1977. FBI agents Richard J. Giannotti and William D. Reagan, who had infiltrated the group for 6 years, lost their cover in November when federal judges needed their testimony to issue warrants for the arrest of Clayton Van Lydegraff and 4 Weather people. But their efforts did lead to several arrests of Weather Underground members in November 1977, when 5 of the members were arrested on conspiracy to bomb the office of California State Senator John Briggs. Members Judith Bissell, Thomas Justison, Leslie Mullen, and Mark Curtis pleaded guilty, while Van Lydegraff who helped write the 1974 Prairie Fire Manifesto, went to trial. But by that time, the political climate had drastically changed, and after President Jimmy Carter granted amnesty for draft dodgers, remaining members of the group surrendered to law enforcement. Mark Rudd surrendered on January 20th, 1978, and was fined $4,000 and received 2 years probation, while Bernardine Dohrn and Bill Ayers both turned themselves in on December 3, 1980, in New York with substantial media coverage. Charges were dropped against Ayers and many others due to the illegal COINTELPRO operations, and Dohrn received 3 years probation and a $1,500 fine. But many others were still on the run, and in 1978, the FBI arrested 5 members who were plotting to bomb a politician's office. Others were captured after 2 policemen and a Brinks driver were murdered in a botched armed robbery in Nanuet, New York in 1981. Other members would be tracked down and captured over the next few years, and that was when Ayers surrendered as well. Jeffrey David Powell surrendered on January 6, 1994, ending nearly 25 years on the run and being pursued by government agencies, and with 2 decades of life underground. He was wanted for his actions during the Days of Rage in October 1969 to protest the war in Vietnam. In that event, dozens of people were injured, and Powell was charged with aggravated assault for hitting a police lieutenant in the head with a lead pipe, a wound that required about 70 stitches. In 1970, while free on bail, Powell skipped bail and disappeared into the radical underground. Powell's statement after his capture was, "I am proud to have fought for my country against the criminal government of Richard Nixon." He said that before surrendering at Cook County Criminal Courts building. And then he said, "And I'm very happy not to be at war with my government now." Powell continued, saying, "Though the Vietnam War with the insurrections in America's cities have ended, the scars and social injustices are still with us, bearing bitter fruit. 1 in 8 American children will go to bed hungry tonight. 25% of our youngest children live in poverty. In far too many of our neighborhoods and disintegrating schools, the sound of gunfire is commonplace." As stated in the Tampa Bay Times, Powell pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of mob action, a misdemeanor, and was sentenced to 18 months probation, a $500 fine, and court cost of $210. Prosecutors had sought a jail term of 6 months, but they said the police officer he struck, who was retired, did not object to the disposition of Powell's case. Powell was the last member to be apprehended. From the investigation files, several grand juries were convened from 2001 to 2009 to investigate if the Weather Underground was responsible for the San Francisco Police Department Park Station bombing, in which 1 officer was killed, 1 was maimed, and 8 more were wounded by shrapnel from a pipe bomb. The determination was that the Black Liberation Army was responsible, with whom the WUO members were affiliated. They were also responsible for the bombing of another police precinct in San Francisco, as well as bombing the Catholic Church funeral services of the police officer killed in the Park Precinct bombing in the early summer of 1970. Bill Ayers, whose slogan was, "Kill your parents," is still a darling of the Democrat Party and best friends with former President Barack Obama, among others. And in 2001, the New York Times interviewed him, and he said, "I don't regret setting bombs." Ayers himself became a tenured distinguished professor of education and senior university scholar at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and has since retired. Bernadette Dohrn, another hero to the Marxist left, retired as a clinical associate professor of law at the Children and Family Justice Center at Northwestern University School of Law, where she served from 1991 to 2013. Today, Mark Rudd teaches mathematics at Central New Mexico Community College, and he has said that he doesn't speak publicly about his experiences because he has mixed feelings, guilt, and shame. These are things I am not proud of, and I find it hard to speak publicly about them and to tease out what was right from what was wrong. The Weathermen, or Weather Underground, were arguably one of the most effective politically motivated groups when it came to inciting violence and anti-government actions. But they were a domestic terror group, followed by the new generation such as Black Lives Matter and Antifa, who carried on their platform of violence and intimidation on behalf of the left-wing Marxists in this country, sponsored by the Democrat Party. Thank you for watching this episode of Forgotten History. If you liked what you saw, please click like, share, and subscribe. And if you would like to assist with the ever-increasing cost of production, please consider becoming a channel member and joining our Patreon page. Please check out our merchandise store. And thanks for watching.